All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to NGI and welcome to our third coronavirus update. Wanted to welcome everybody and introduce you all to our new intern. His name is Thomas. He is joining us all the way from Hawaii, and it is not even sunrise over there. So he's a true trooper and joining us at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Hi, Thomas.
Not so bright, but definitely early, that's for sure.
Well, thank you for your dedication and welcome to NGI. We're happy to have you.
My pleasure. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, so how's everybody's social distancing going this week?
Losing it. I have been preparing for this my whole life. I like being home. I like having my kids here. I mean, there's some challenges, but so far they're pretty self-sufficient doing their schoolwork, and I'm enjoying it. Talk to me in 2 weeks. I'll probably be going stir crazy, but for now it's been going okay for me.
That's good. How about you, Laura?
I think for me, because my kids are super active, it's a little bit hard to determine where that line is with them. So, do we have a couple people that we hang out with, because right now the governor's limiting it to 10 people in groups.
Mm-hmm.
So, do we have a couple play dates and get them out, or do we just have everybody stay outside, or, so it's kind of navigating where that line is.
She also has a principal for her husband, so she has a built-in teacher at home.
Yes,
which is kind of unfair.
This is huge. I mean, huge. Yes.
Not
So
fair.
our roles have really flipped. I mean, he's really the stay-at-home principal dad at this point, which is it's amazing because he does lessons every morning for about 2 hours. He's made up his own stuff. I mean, it's amazing. Yeah.
We should get like a classroom together.
Yeah. You should be recording it because it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. It needs to be like an online service that he now like subs out. He's like contracted out. Like he's got a job forever. This is gonna be great. So like you just need to market that and roll with it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree with that. So we don't know, and that's the other thing, we don't know how long we're out of school for. So right now it's until March 30th and they have not extended it. So I don't know. We'll sort of see what happens.
Got it. Yeah. How about you, Sam?
So the only thing that's really changed for me is my Zumba classes. So I'm missing those. Those have been canceled for at least the next 2 weeks. They're going to kind of, play it by ear, see how things go. So I'm missing that aspect because that's just so much more fun in person. But a lot of other instructors are doing, virtual classes. So that might be something that I do. So it's kind of forcing us to be creative.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and, we've been taking more walks. My husband's work closed as well. So we've just been spending more time together and, just trying to find the positives in it. More family dinners, stuff like that. So.
So on Jimmy Fallon last night, one of the hashtags was, "This is going to end in death or divorce." So hopefully, and that doesn't happen for anybody, but it was pretty funny.
We're not getting on each other's nerves too much yet. Keyword yes.
That's good.
Yeah.
And Tom, how about you?
Yeah, I keep on hearing about this 9-month baby boom from now. What month does that put us in?
Right?
Very
Divorce or babies, I
possible.
don't
Very
know.
possible.
The coronials, right, is what they're calling them.
The coronials.
There you go.
That's
Oh
awesome.
my gosh.
That's great.
Yeah, life is relatively similar because I'm a grad student, so I'm kind of still stuck in the books. Gym is closed, so that's definitely been more difficult to adapt to, but just, trying to rock the home workouts.
Yep.
Getting really familiar with Zoom.
Yeah.
All of my meetings are now virtual, group and one-on-one. So that's been an interesting little adaptation there, but trying to be a little bit more careful whenever I run errands, things like that. But being in Hawaii, I always have access to the outdoors. So I'm like, you know what? Some more opportunity to, go on hikes or go to the beach and, obviously keep my 6-foot distance,
Right.
but relatively, still able to live a high quality life.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I think my kids officially hate me. So we've been on lockdown. I implemented our little social distancing a little bit earlier, I think, than most. But I have teenagers, and so not everybody is doing the social distancing, or, you know, they have different degrees of social distancing. And so, you know, like I would say about a third of their friends are doing social distancing, a third is doing sort of like an in-between, and then a third just don't seem to care. And it's still party time. The governor did in Virginia basically said no more than 10 people, but, you know, we see cars of teenagers driving around and they've got, you know, 6 people in the car or that kind of stuff. And so it's hard when their friends post things on, you know, social media that they're still getting together and partying and that kind of stuff. So, you know, my kids think that I am, you know, some awful person from Germany from years ago. You know, so they're really, really upset with me. For not letting them go and do and that sort of thing. And so explaining to them, you know, sort of what is happening has been pretty challenging. So, but we're doing more arts and crafts and, you know, cooking and that sort of thing, and trying to kind of get through these times. But because NGI is, you know, virtual at all, in fact, all of our companies, SNPED and Omics, are all virtual, work has pretty much been the same for us. So, you know, I just have kids at home now all the time. They don't go to school. They've extended school being out all the way through spring break. They basically canceled spring break for us here in Virginia. So, yeah, I think that, you know, there's lots of questions. I think parents have a lot of questions. You know, will kids go back to school you know, for the rest of the year? And, you know, I think there's a lot of scary, confusing sort of things about the economy, all kinds of stuff like that. So, you know, there's a lot of things happening, and, you know, there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of, you know, confusion out there. One of the things that we want to do for you guys today, you know, because, you know, there's just a lot of, you know, uncertainty, a lot of unsettling information out there. Of course, I'm touching my face again. Go back and watch our other.
Yeah, but at least you're in your own house. So.
I am in my own house, and it's relatively clean. I did cancel my housekeepers. You know, I told them not to come, so I'm using my kids as slave labor, right? They're supposed to be. They're kind of sucking at it, guys. They're not doing a good job. I think we're all living in dirty houses right now. But what we want to do is really work on helping you guys kind of sift through the information. We do want you guys to stay tuned into the end. We do have what we recommend as a practice. Some of the things that we're working on. So, you know, we've gotten a lot of questions about, you know, how does this apply to my genetics? How does this apply to me? And gosh, you know, NGI and Dr. Chrissy, what can you guys do to help me? So we are developing a panel specifically for immune function and the cytokine storm, you know, some of those things that are a little bit scary to think about, but there are certain genetic predispositions, guys, that matter. And so some people are more at risk and other people not so much. And gosh, wouldn't it be important to know if you were in one of those categories? So we have been working overdrive, another reason why kids are hating me right now, because we're not going out and doing lots of fun stuff. I'm basically in my hole in my office and working my tail off. So is the rest of my team. Sorry guys, love you, mean it. But you know, we are in hyperdrive here at NGI because we're really working to make sure that we're here to serve you guys. So what we want to do today is kind of, you know, take a look at all of the information that's out there right now, because there's a lot of data, okay? And there's a lot of conflicting data that's really confusing. And we want to go through that information with you guys and talk about, you know, what's the pharmaceutical industry doing? What's the natural medicine industry doing? You know, how does this virus even work, and why does it matter? And then, you know, maybe how we can, you know, talk about some of those things and just kind of settle some of the fears that are out there, okay? Because this can be a little bit scary, but really and truly, I think we're getting a good handle on some of these things. So let's go ahead and start our presentation, and we'll kind of go through some of these things. So this part always takes a little second. I'm sorry about that. And for all of those parents who are stuck at home with their kids, I just heard my daughter open and close the door upstairs. You may see a kid, hear a dog bark, anything fun and exciting happen in the background for these videos. Please excuse us. We're at home too. All right, so hang tight for a second. All right. Well, all righty. Okay, so let's start with state of the research, like state of the union. So because we're hearing a lot from our government these days, it seemed a little fitting to start here. So because it seems like every day we're having a ton of research come out and a ton of studies come out, one of the things that I want you guys to remember, either our clinicians listening or our patients listening, is that most of the studies are not peer reviewed, okay? And so if you're not familiar with what peer reviewed means, it means that it hasn't gone through the rigorous application and process of other scientists looking at this information to go, hey, you know what, this is actually true, okay, or actually likely true. Because sometimes even once it's been peer reviewed, it can be debunked later, okay? So this is rapidly evolving. We're basically putting out information and saying, well, this is probably true, or it's based on a really small sample set or really small amount of people that we've looked at, and this is what we think might be happening. Okay, so it's really, really important for us to not draw conclusions based on just this little teeny tiny bit of population sample. The other thing about this is that it may also be based on what's happening in Asia, okay? If you're not Asian, this may not apply to you, okay? This is also really, really important. So one of the things that we talk about at NGI all the time is to know your population, okay? So when you're looking at genetics, super, super important, okay? So the other thing that we've talked about here is that there's tons of data. It's super overwhelming. And there may be some data that's not necessarily true, okay? So Sam, what happened to you the other day?
Apparently there was a rumor, or there was a text going around that the National Guard was going to be just rolling out into Virginia, and it was just inciting all of this panic. And so I know for me personally, I've had to really unplug from social media because the rumors are strong. So it goes to say, look for the actual data that is true, because it's not necessary to stress over rumors, because then you're going to be stressed out. And what happens when we're stressed? Our immune systems become compromised. So,
and if you're somebody who does want to read all this, and you feel the need to send it all to me and ask me if it's true, I don't have time to read and watch every video. So before you do that, just put it into Snopes or one of those other fact checker websites, because I got one the other day about putting a hairdryer up to your nose to heat the nasal passage, which kind of makes sense. I mean, you know, I can see why they thought it was real, but then the more I watched this video, because I did watch a little bit of it, I was like, oh my God. It's just, you gotta like, you really have to weed through the stuff. I know everyone wants an answer, but we need to be careful with.
And there are so many scams going around because there are awful people who want to take advantage of the fact that people are afraid right now and not sure who to believe. And so just be very careful with what information you actually take in.
Absolutely. I don't imagine that, we're going to go into the hairdryer business, but somebody might, somebody might go into the micro hairdryer business. But, the fact is here, guys, is that there's not any valid research to suggest that this works. Okay, so, I mean, yes, viruses do die at super high temperatures, but if you're having something that hot go up your nose, you're gonna have other problems, okay? So let's not do this. This is not what we need to be doing. We don't need to be going to the ER because we burned the inside of your nasal passages. So let's skip that. And let's focus on what we need to work on, which is keeping our immune system strong and healthy. So, and the other thing here is that, we do have a limited truth factor, kind of wrapping all of that up. So you may not be able to draw valid conclusions from some of these things. So anybody hear about the blood type study that came out the other day?
Yep.
Thomas, did you hear about this too?
I have heard about it. Yeah, it's been going around. Something regarding, I don't know, like the O blood type or something like that.
Yeah. Anybody have type O blood?
Which means I'm not going to get it. I'm safe.
I'm A positive. I'm doomed.
O positive.
Okay. So All right, sorry, type O's, you're still at risk for getting the SARS-2 virus, okay? So this was based on 200 participants, all right? So, and those of you who study science, this is not enough, okay? It also wasn't peer reviewed, all right? So it basically said that if you have type A, then you're more likely to get the virus, and that maybe if you eat certain other things that are going to impact the receptibility of your type A, that, like soy and these types of things, that you could possibly change the risk factor and all these things. Type A people rushed out and bought their soy milk, their edamame, all these kinds of things. This is not a thing, guys, okay? So there are lots of people that shouldn't be eating soy. Let's talk about oxalates. Let's talk about estrogen. And we could open up a whole can of worms here. This is why we do precision medicine. By the way, this is not designed to, we're not offering medical advice here today, just putting out the disclaimer since we didn't say it yet, okay? This is for educational purposes only. But here, okay, so for type O, guys, you still are at risk. You still could be a vector, okay? You could still be having that capability of spreading this virus. Okay, so quick other little note here. I know we've talked about this before in our previous YouTube videos, but the RO or R naught number, okay? So this is a very contagious virus, okay? So if let's just say you're a carrier, let's just say you're the vector, the likelihood is that you're gonna spread this to 3 to 5 different people, okay? Even if you're not symptomatic, that's a pretty high number, okay? And then, we're talking about things like influenza, okay? You're only gonna spread that likely to 1 other person, okay? This is one of the reasons why we're telling people, hey, you should stay home. This is one of the reasons why my kids are like, to mom right now, okay? As I just got a dirty look from one of them over there. So this is why we're trying to take a really good look at this virus. This is why we're talking about it for our 3rd week in a row here at NGI instead of doing our roundtables that we usually do. The point about this particular virus is, do we actually have all of the information? And as we're looking at here, we've got studies that are not peer reviewed. We've got lots and lots of data. We're putting out things that we're not really sure are true. We've got 60 drugs under development. These are things that we don't typically have this type of massive response. We don't have this massive government response. But do we have the number of tests out there? Do we have actually accurate data? And the problem is no, we really don't. We really don't have accurate data. So our death rate, our mortality rate that's calculated, this is a shifting number, guys, okay? So when we're looking at this information, we're only really testing people who are already really sick, okay? People that already really get sick are already having immune dysfunction. Okay, so I'll leave that there on the table for you to make your own conclusions. Again, we don't talk about politics here at NGI. That's for you guys to think about. But when we're thinking about actual numbers, actual data, if we're only testing the sickest people, and then out of those sickest people, we're determining what our death rate is, don't you think that number might be a little bit skewed? Okay. Yeah, so this is something when we're thinking about how it's impacting our lives, how we're changing our school systems, how we're changing our economic power, how we're changing all of these things. These are all things that we need to think about as scientists, how we need to think about as parents, how we need to think about as citizens. So yes, we absolutely should practice social isolation or social distancing until we know more information. That's the safest thing that we can do to protect our weakest members of the population, because nobody wants their loved one to be a casualty. That's not a thing, okay? But how long we do that, we need to be part of the solution to figure out what the answers are. So that's, again, why we're here today. So let's talk about this mechanism, okay? Let's talk about how this virus actually works. And what we think we know so far about how this virus works is that it works on something called the ACE receptors, okay? And so ACE receptors are found in the lungs and the gastrointestinal system. And what we think we know is that if you have issues with these ACE receptors, that you may actually have GI symptoms first. Okay, so for those of you out there, one, I don't want you to think, oh my gosh, I ate some bad Mexican the other day, and now I think I have SARS, for those spring breakers out there who maybe drink too much alcohol, it could actually be SARS, or it might be the aforementioned. But either way, we're finding that a lot of people are having GI distress as a first symptom, and sometimes it's the only symptom. But what came out of Asia was that, some people that had GI symptoms actually had more severe symptoms if they actually did develop COVID, or COVID-19, which of course is the disease, where we have cytokine storm and those types of things. This does seem to impact men greater than women, and this of course is based on the information out of Asia, and especially men that have pre-existing conditions who are over 60. There's conflicting evidence of whether or not blockers for this particular enzyme, like lisinopril, these are ACE inhibitors, are helpful or harmful. And we are going to talk about that controversy and mechanism in just a few minutes. So one of the things that is the end product, what actually causes the damage to the organs, is a hormone called aldosterone. And so this has to do with blood pressure and vasodilation and constriction. And it's on the axis with cortisol and sex hormones, which is one of the things that we talk about a lot in terms of how we modulate that. So if you get super stressed out because you're worried about all of this, this might actually increase your risk factor for getting sicker, okay? And so that's one of the reasons why we really need to make sure that we're not overstressing and unplugging like Samantha's doing, making sure that we're not focusing too much on social media or the media in general on all of these things. All right, so a couple of the genes. We're just going to touch on these very lightly. These are more for practitioners who are looking at this. But the ACE deletion, so this is not the ACE2 gene, but this is something that's above this. The ACE deletion is something that we look at in terms of blood pressure risk factors. And so we do find that people that have the ACE deletion may actually be at greater risk for developing this COVID-19. The reason that is because it causes a net increase in aldosterone, and it's because it overconverts angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. This also causes increase in autoimmunity, stress, and hypertension, of course. And then for those of you who have autoimmune conditions, unfortunately, autoimmunity tends to upregulate the production of cytokines. So this is one of the risk groups, those people who have autoimmune disease. Now, looking at SARS-2 specifically, the ACE2 gene, or the ACE2 receptor, is actually the mechanism in which the virus has entry into the body. What's interesting is those who have genetic issues here, and these are some of the variants that we look at here, they're present in 95% of East Asians. So this makes a lot of sense when we're looking at the data that we already have. But then when we look at the European population or Caucasian populations, less than 65% of Europeans carry the major allele. So, we're starting to look at data here again and prediction value. This is something that's really important. Again, know your population. Another gene that's associated, let's talk about what happens here. So basically, if you have that ACE deletion, you're basically going to have electrolyte issues. So you're going to have low potassium and cardiovascular complications. And so you're typically going to be having a low sodium diet to take care of that. So, you would be looking for validation here. You would have low potassium, you would have high sodium, which is kind of interesting because you're finding that we have low potassium for these patients, but not necessarily high potassium. This is really important because with the COVID-19 cases that we're seeing hypokalemia or low potassium, especially with those that have hypertension and cardiovascular disease. The other interesting thing that we're finding is that people that have the ApoE4 gene, they typically deplete potassium a little bit faster. So ApoE4, of course, gives you a greater risk factor for cardiovascular disease and also Alzheimer's. So those also might be categories or people that have greater risk factors. So one other gene just that plays along in this pathway is the angiotensinogen gene, or AGT. One of the things that we do to kind of maintain this is make sure that we keep our water balance intake and make sure that we're keeping our stress in balance. So we won't talk too much about this. But if you've ever had preeclampsia, for ladies out there, this may be something that you need to be paying attention to. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this over to Laura and let her talk a little bit about this pathway and how it relates. So Laura's got a gene bite that will go into this pathway in much more detail, but it'll be a shorter segment. So I'm going to let Laura talk about this pathway and the mechanism a little bit more.
All right. So like you said, obviously the RAS system really is working on regulating fluid and volume, the volume of fluids in the body, as well as blood pressure. And so I'm going to kind of walk through the pathway a little bit so that you can kind of understand where ACE2 begins to create a problem. So if we're looking up at the top where we see angiotensin 1, what happens there is the ACE gene, so basically like ACE1, converts that into angiotensin 2. And so that's where you can see there in blue where it says ACE2, or we can use this one, whichever one. That's okay. So where there's that ACE2 gene, this is sort of what we're looking at here. And so ACE2 has a receptor called the AT1 receptor. And what happens here is when there's a high amount of angiotensin 2, ACE2 kind of pops off that receptor. And so our understanding is that as that happens, there's an opening for the virus to enter. So in doing that too, you're not converting angiotensin 2, which we don't have quite on here, but you're not converting angiotensin 2 into another form, which is angiotensin 1-7. Yep, and we can move over here. So angiotensin 1-7. So if you look at angiotensin 2, you'll find that it actually causes vasodilation, it causes inflammation. So it's, increasing blood pressure, increasing aldosterone levels, where as angiotensin 2 turns into angiotensin 1-7, you're actually getting, the anti-inflammatory effect, the vasodilation instead of the vasoconstriction. And you're getting all those benefits, of that. So that's that balance, of course, between the two of them. So both super important, but what happens with ACE2 when you have that lower ACE2 expression that is basically happening because of the virus or because of higher levels of angiotensin 2, you end up having this incredible upregulation and increase in inflammation. And then because angiotensin is high, you get high levels of aldosterone. And aldosterone, of course, is what's creating that low potassium. So this is sort of the system, the process that we're seeing. And I'll go into that a little bit more when I do our gene bite. The other thing to kind of mention too is that ACE2 is regulated by AMPK, but I might throw that back to you, Chrissy, to talk about a little bit more. But that's also kind of connects to the immune system as well.
Sure. So AMPK is basically a master regulatory pathway that, when we talk about obesity, inflammation, insulin resistance, we're looking at how the body is controlling cortisol, those types of things. So if we flip back over here, we're looking at our sympathetic nervous system. So when we think about how the body is actually responding, I always talk about the aldosterone, cortisol, and sex hormone pathway. I usually tell patients I get my pen out because that's usually what's on my desk. And then we talk about the cortisol pathway in the middle. So if we change our sex hormones, then usually our aldosterone levels go down. Or if our aldosterone levels go up and we have hypertension and our sex hormones go down, then usually we have, sexual dysfunction or impotence, and we have hypertension. And then if we throw cortisol in the middle, basically that exacerbates the problem. So this is where we get cardiometabolic disease, and we have, sorry, honey, I don't want to have sex this year kind of thing. And it is this process where this whole system is really related, and our sympathetic nervous system gets upregulated, okay? So we get this issue here coming directly from angiotensin 2, okay? So this is where we start thinking about, if we're looking at our ACE2 basically being popped off by that little spiky bit on the SARS-2 virus. Okay, so it literally goes in there and it pops it off. And then, so what we're finding, or what we're postulating here, is that people that have issues either with ACE2 or have issues with ACE2 in terms of their genetics, and also have the ACE deletion, those are the people that are going to be at the highest genetic risk for this end organ damage, okay? And then if you add stress, add cortisol into that system, add insulin resistance on top of that, already have high levels of aldosterone, have high blood pressure, have kidney dysfunction, because remember, this is going to cause low levels of potassium in the body. These are all things that are going to exacerbate or escalate this process very quickly. Okay, so this is how we're going to get to that cytokine storm. This is how we're going to get to death, unfortunately. This is the fast express pathway. Okay, so when we're talking about this process, we have ways to modulate these genes. This is why we do this, okay? This is what we do when we're looking at this genetic expression. And, you know, one of the things that we were talking about earlier is that, you know, as you get older, you have more opportunity for genetic expression, epigenetic activation, right? So, you know, these are the things that turn on, your bad genes turn on the more environmental exposure you have, the more stress you have in your life, all of these things. So this is one of the reasons why the older you get, the more risk factor you have, especially if you unfortunately have some of these genetic risk factors.
And so one of the things we were also talking about with that too was that, you know, as this virus makes its way through the United States, which does have some pretty significant issues with obesity and diabetes and blood pressure and cardiometabolic disease, are we going to see a shift in the population dynamics where more people at a younger age are actually struggling, you know, with fighting the virus? Even
though we only have, well, we can't even get back to the page.
Right, the 65%, less than 65%, yeah.
Right, so, I mean, it's, you know, pretty remarkable that we have, you know, that, you know, demographic, you know, because we have the, you know, the change in our epigenetic activation, because we have that problem with cardiometabolic disease in the US. So I do think that, you know, we may have a higher mortality rate than maybe Asia did because of that, despite our, you know, despite our genetic advantage. So it will be interesting to see. So, and I think that might be why our government is responding the way that it is. So, you know, they understand that we have more comorbid conditions to be concerned about here. So
something else to kind of mention too is, you know, it's not conflict, but in sort of interesting conversation around ACE inhibitors and the other high blood pressure medications, and whether or not they're actually helping or hurting this process as well. And again, I think we were talking about how that goes back to what your genetics are, and how that, breaks down.
Right. So, I mean, if you're able to block this section here, you know, an ACE inhibitor, it's going to depend on whether or not you have the ACE deletion or not, whether or not that's helpful or not. And the ARBs are going to be, you know, helpful depending on whether or not you have genetic polymorphism. So again, this is one of the reasons why knowing your genomics are very, very important in this moment, and quite frankly, in most moments. Having this kind of precision is very helpful and can make all the difference in the world.
And that's why we see the difference. I mean, that's why we see some people do well and it seems to work for them. And then for other people, it doesn't. And nobody can quite figure out why there's the conflicting data.
Correct.
And often it's a genetic reason.
It's a genetic reason, and not to forget the gene-gene interactions.
Right.
So it's going to matter if you have one or the other or both or neither. So, making sure that, and studies are not controlling for these things. We're just looking at broad population studies. And so that is why we don't have definitive data on pretty much anything out there, which is super confusing and and frustrating. But again, the difficult thing for us is that we have to postulate on mechanism and then make decisions. But to the best of our ability, that is what we are doing, and looking at the way that this works, and then making clinical decisions with other physicians. So that is what we're doing here, and hopefully we will get funding to do studies at some point. All right, so let's take a look and see what the pharmaceuticals companies have to offer in terms of what we know as of yesterday. Okay, so truth be told, we were up until 11 o'clock last night getting all of this data assimilated. So this is what we know of as of last night at 11 o'clock in terms of this. And again, there are over 60 things as of yesterday that were in drug development for this condition, either as preventative or as action for the COVID-19 condition. So the first thing, Alinea. Many of you may have heard of this. This is an antiprozoal agent or antiparasitic agent. I may stumble a little bit. Again, I was up really late last night. I usually go to bed early. But this is something that was found at very low dosages to be able to inhibit viral replication. We're not really going to go too much into mechanism. For those of you who are practitioners or into pharmaceuticals or pharmacists, the information is here for you. One of the things that we did find was that Alinea works better with triple therapy, so with other antiviral medications. It does basically stop the RNA replication process. So this is something, if you are already taking Alinea, I know a lot of children that take this for Lyme disease. There are people that take this for GI issues, of course, if you have any sort of other parasitic infection, those types of things. This may actually help protect you from getting this particular viral infection. So something to be thoughtful about. Again, just because you're taking something doesn't mean, okay, great, I can go out. I'm not going to infect other people. Have a great day. That's not what this means. This basically just means that you may actually have some protection against the infection. The next one, nifamostat. This is an anticoagulant in Asia. It's also a serine protease inhibitor elsewhere in the world. This was very effective at preventing the COVID infection or the SARS-2. Very interestingly, after we just talked about all of this, it results in hyperkalemia or high potassium levels. Okay, so the mechanism on this one is pretty interesting. We're going to talk just a pinch about this just because this one is one that you would use if you started to have the cytokine storm. So it basically stops liposaccharide-induced nitric oxide production. Okay, so nitric oxide production is basically going to cause vasodilation. It stops apoptosis or cell death destruction process. It stops interleukin-6, interleukin-8. Those are things that basically are pro-inflammatory cytokines, those bad guys that are going all through their body. It's shown to act as an antioxidant and tumor necrosis factor induced reactive oxygen species production. Okay, so basically it's a shitstorm stopper, okay? That's the only way we're gonna say that. When we have cytokine production and your body is basically going absolutely haywire, this basically stops that, okay? The other thing that this does, because it's an anticoagulant, it's stopping that process as well. So when your body goes into sepsis, it goes into shock, what do we want to do? We want to calm that process. We want to stop all of the blood from leaking out of your tissues. okay? We don't want that to happen. This drug is doing this. Pretty amazing, okay? So this is neuroprotective. It's helping protecting your brain. It's protecting your organs. It's, you know, if you are in a situation, you or your loved one is in a situation where we're having cytokine storm, then this is something that you should consider, okay? So food for thought on that one. Favipiravir, I think I said that right. This is a Japanese influenza drug. It's also called Avigan. 100% effective in protecting against Ebola. It has an EC50 value of about 67. That's basically EC50. So you guys may be seeing things like this if you're looking at research. This is the amount of the drug required to produce a response, about 50% from baseline. This number can be a little bit confusing. You will find that that number changes depending on how much the concentration is. So sometimes you'll see a really tiny number, sometimes you'll see a big number. In this case, 67 was pretty good. In fact, it was really good. What they found was that patients who were given this basically had less damage to their lungs, and then they got better about 4 days after being infected versus people who didn't get it. It was taking them 11 days to get better. One of the things here is that this drug, very similar to things like Tamiflu and other HIV drugs like retrovirals, you have to take it like pretty much when you start to get sick, okay? So if you wait until you're really sick, like the cytokine storm, not going to work very well, all right? So the problem that we have here, especially in the US currently, is that we don't have access to a lot of tests. Okay, so LabCorp recently started to have availability of tests for practitioners. We're working on having access to those tests. You know, it's challenging. So we're working on that as a country to have more availability of testing. But, currently right now there are some, still some limited availability, and we're not still testing people until they're really sick. So this is a catch-22. One of the most popular antiretrovirals, Kaletra, I couldn't say that yesterday for patients. I finally got it out today, but it did fail in more rigorous trials as of the so just to let you know that is not something that you should be recommending to your patients if you're a prescribing physician. All right, remdesivir. So this potently blocked viral infections at very low molecular concentrations as well. This one basically sneaks into the RNA virus, replaces one of the A, T, C's, and G's, or U's, excuse me. It replaces the A, so it's pretty sneaky. Which is kind of good, but then it basically stops the production of viral replication, which is very helpful, okay? So this is also something that if you're having massive amounts of viral replication in the body, this one can basically hijack the virus and stop the production of viral particles. This one was also found to confer 100% protection against Ebola. This one is very, very popular, was mentioned by our president the other day, is Plaquenil, okay? So this is an anti-malarial drug. It has been around for over 50 years, typically used for patients that have lupus. This one blocked the SARS-2 virus at about 500 milligrams per day, okay? So this is a pretty normal dose. We don't necessarily need to go into the mechanism here. I've listed it here for those of you who are interested in looking at that. I don't really want to overwhelm patients who are listening to this. You can screenshot it if you want to take a look here. But what the French have actually found is that if you combine this with azithromycin or Zithromax, it actually stops the RNA from being translated. Okay, so kind of like the drug we just talked about, it's basically going to stop the way that the genome of the virus can be produced, and that vasodilation and cytokine storm basically stops in its tracks. Okay, So together, if we have both Plaquenil and if we have the Zithromax together, the white blood cells come down, the cytokines come down, and that taking Plaquenil on its own can actually confer some protection. So for those of you out there who've been taking Plaquenil for quite some time, you may actually have some protection, much like Alinea. And then if you were to actually get sick, then adding in things like azithromycin may actually be very helpful in addition to that therapy. Okay, so that is what we know of for right now. Guys, do you guys have any comments on the pharmaceuticals that we talked about or that I talked about?
I do think that, and you can kind of correct me if I'm wrong here. I think to some extent they're not using them super widespread at this point because they're doing more clinical trials on them, is what I understand. So I think we're still not at the point where if you were to go to the hospital that would necessarily be the treatment you were given, because they're trying to keep the population that they're working on and looking at and collecting data is pretty small still. So they're not, even though it's not, widely available, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be given these drugs.
The scary thing is that you have to consent to being in a trial, and then they may give you control.
Correct.
So you don't know when you go in for those types of things. And so, as an informed patient, you should go in and, that's why we're giving you this information. So the more education you have, the more informed you are, the more decision power you have. So, for those of you who may not have insurance or may not have the ability to pay for some of these medications, then you may be at the mercy of being in a trial. The good thing about Plaquenil is that it is generic, or the hydroxychloroquine is generic. It is inexpensive, and a Z-Pak, as Zithromax is inexpensive as well. So those two medications would be something that you could easily get a hold of. The other two Asian medications, they were developed during the Ebola crisis a couple of years ago in 2014, and they are most certainly going to be expensive. Alinea is also, brand name, but, could relatively be, accessible. There is a generic for that, I believe. Don't quote me on that one. Actually, I'm not sure that Alinea is. Maybe one of you guys can Google that while we're talking. But, I do know that the Plaquenil and antibiotic treatment would be relatively inexpensive. So,
I think the government is trying to speed some of this up too, with trying to push, these trials and everything. But I do think there's quite a risk with doing that as well. And I think even that with the vaccine, that kind of conversation around a vaccine and trying to push it too quickly is there is a big risk, and there's a possibility that it could actually make things worse. It can have the reverse effect. So you want the trials to happen and not push too hard. But Plaquenil seems to have pretty good research basis, so that might speed it up a little bit more and make it more available.
I hope so. Of course, looking at, pharmacogenomics, those types of things. So, and that's one of the things that, in our panel, we'll be looking at pharmacogenomics for people for these medications. There will be certain people that can tolerate these drugs and other people that cannot. So it's really important to understand how your body works and how your body will process these things. So that's the next controversy and conversation is, what do we recommend? This is one of those things. You're getting bombarded by people out there telling you what to take, how to take it, why to take it. And so let's talk about this. So, we're going to basically recommend what has robust evidence for prevention, and then a few things that have moderate evidence for prevention. And when we say robust, we mean hundreds of studies. And when we say moderate, we mean dozens and dozens and dozens of studies. So and these are not, this doesn't mean it's 2 studies. It doesn't mean that we did N of 1 studies. We're talking about lots and lots of information here. And then we're also talking about things that are, generally applicable for, 95 to 99% of the population. When we're hearing lots of information come out, arguments about theanine, arguments about vitamin C, how much vitamin D should you take, blah, 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 blah. There's all these things. So I'm actually I want to hear what's the chatter, guys? What's the chatter hearing?
Well, the big one now is the IV vitamin C, which has had a study done in China that is working, but it's not long-term. So it may work short-term, but for people who are just taking really high doses of oral vitamin C for a long period of time, remember we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, they could have oxalate issues, they're going to have pain. So I think that study does not translate into everyday high-dose vitamin C. For people. It was an interesting study. I mean, it is an interesting, people are like, oh, vitamin C, it's going to cure everything, which it may. I don't know, but I wouldn't take a high dose every day.
Right.
We also talked about how vitamin C depletes glutathione, which I think we mentioned before as well, but still there's some confusion about that. I think I got that on one of the groups that we were in as well, that it was like, oh, it does that? I didn't know that. So I don't know if you want to talk about how that works.
Yeah, so actually ascorbate, the way that vitamin C actually is made to kind of get reduced and to get the ascorbate radical back into like the safe form, it requires 2 reduced glutathiones. And so when you upregulate or you take too much vitamin C to kind of get it back into the safe form of vitamin C in the body, to not induce the Fenton reaction, you're basically going to drain glutathione. And so you're going to drain reduced glutathione. And so this is going to put a strain on your body stores when you ascorbate load. Okay, and so there actually been reports of people who normally would get like glutathione IVs or take high dose glutathione who are starting to have massively nasty reactions to their glutathione dosages because they've been ascorbate loading because of this coronavirus issue.
Well, and also oftentimes vitamin C and glutathione are in the same IV.
Yeah,
so that's the other.
Yeah, Myers, all these things. So it's really interesting. So if you are in the if you're in the cytokine storm, so basically, and again, we're not talking about the massive mechanism of a cytokine storm. That's way outside of the scope of what we're going to talk about here today. And guys, there's so much we could talk about. We're trying not to keep these any longer than an hour, just because of retention. Nobody really wants to sit here and listen for more than an hour a lot of times, and sometimes even that's too long. But I mean, if you guys really want us to talk about the cytokine storm, we can do that. But that will be another discussion, maybe specifically for practitioners. But if you're in the cytokine storm and you're close to end organ failure, then yes, things like ozone, things like IV ozone and things like IV vitamin C have been found to be effective. And that's because they're scavenging, okay? At that point, you've got so much inflammation, you have so much going on, they do go in and scavenge, okay? That's a different circumstance. That's why we have prevention. There are 2 phases, okay? There's the preventative stage. There's there's this little itty bitty phase, like where you start to get sick, and then there's cytokine storm. Okay, so there's really 2 phases of prevention and then sick. Okay, and you have 2 different treatment protocols for those 2 phases, which is why there's so much confusion. That's why there's so much chaos and chatter out there of, elderberry's okay, elderberry's not okay, vitamin C is okay, vitamin C is not okay, vitamin D is okay, vitamin D is not okay. There's why there's so much of this la 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 out there, because people are not making the distinction. There's a preventative stage, but as soon as you get sick, we'll come back to this, as soon as you get sick, you have to stop all supplements that upregulate the immune system, okay? We have to stop the NF-kappa beta cytokine storm. Okay, that includes mushrooms, vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin A, herbals, all of that stuff. Okay, the last thing that you want to do if your immune system is against you and attacking you is to give it more fuel for the fire. Okay, that makes sense, right? Audrey.
Yeah, this is what's going on with people who have autoimmune disease too. So that's why.
That is absolutely correct. That's why we don't even pre-COVID-19 days, that's why we don't give people reishi mushrooms that have, Hashimoto's. That's why we don't give them things that upregulate their immune system. That's why we don't blindly give out anything that really stimulates that immune response, okay? Because the last thing that we want to do is to drive the immune system. The immune system's already got the gun, okay? The immune system, they hear, they're ready to fight, okay? That's the last thing that we want to do is give it more ammunition. I mean, what are we thinking? That's craziness. Why would you do that? You wouldn't, okay? So especially if your immune system is having, a bomb go off, an atomic bomb in your body, why in the world would you give it more ammunition? You wouldn't. You wouldn't.
Well, you end up hurting, you hurt yourself. I mean, that's what cytokine storm does.
Exactly.
Well, that's the problem, especially on social media. People are just making these widespread recommendations, and we know from what we do on a daily basis that if you don't know a person's genetics, if you don't know their biochemistry, if you don't know their medical history or their symptoms or what medications they're on, what supplements they're on, you just can't do that. It's going to cause more harm than good, more than likely. So that's why I had to unplug a lot, because people are like, oh, this worked for me, so it must work for thousands of other people. And that's just, it's not, it's unsafe. It's not responsible.
Let me tell you a protocol on it. And by the way, it's like that's what is driving me crazy right now. I mean, it's like there's this massive influx of not only content, but also, marketing and all kinds of stuff. And so, I mean, yes, we are trying to do what we do, but we're not trying to, I don't know. I don't know. I just feel like there is a flood of
opinions
and
people trying to
capitalizing on things like this. And so, just to be clear, we're putting out information for people. We're doing what we do anyway, what we do on a regular basis. Just to be really frank, we're not trying to sell you anything. So, just to kind of come back to this, low dose vitamin D, if you're not sick, if you're working on your immune system for prevention, low dose vitamin D, this should be in the right ratio with vitamin A, okay? Vitamin D and vitamin A, they're besties. Remember, we talked about this before. They both need each other for their receptors, okay? Really a 2-to-1 ratio. Caveat, pregnant women breastfeeding, stay away from vitamin A, okay? Make sure you're not taking vitamin A then. Low dose vitamin C, okay? If you can get this, like, eat an orange, okay? You don't have to take a supplement. Can be a thing, all right? And for our oxalate people, you don't really have to, don't really go above 250 milligrams, okay? That's your max, okay? But, this is, if you have hyperoxaluria in terms of genetics, then, call us, talk to us. It's really a little bit lower than this.
And there are lots of oranges at the grocery store. Not a lot of toilet paper. There are a lot of oranges.
There are a lot of oranges.
Silver lining.
Right? I have on my counter over there. Zinc. This is really important, okay? So zinc gluconate will actually kill virus on contact, all right? So if you can find zinc lozenges, they're pretty difficult to find right now, but if you can find them, suck on a zinc lozenge once a day. If not, zinc capsules. So a lot of people have zinc capsules at home. Open them up, put them in some hot water, gargle it, get it way back there, and then swallow it, okay? So this is something, it doesn't taste very good. I always try something before I recommend it. It's not the most pleasant thing in the world, but it works, okay? Make sure that you do this with some food, otherwise you might get a little bit of an upset stomach. Also experience that. But this is something that can be helpful if you can't get a hold of zinc lozenges. The other thing that we know about zinc in the immune system is that it helps to increase lactobacilli. So this helps our microbiome. Our microbiome is very, very important in terms of how it regulates our immune system. For those of you who are members of SNP-Ed, please go look at our microbiome lectures. We've got all kinds of data in there. But this is something that can really, really help to modulate your immune system. Really, really, really important. So if you're taking things like zinc carnosine to help keep your mucosal layers in there, secretory IgA, guys, okay, this is super, super important. How do you think the virus is going to first get here? If you can wash it down, this is not exactly a hairdryer to the nose, guys. We're actually talking about things that can actually get rid of viral particles and kill it on contact. What were we talking about? It was ACE2 is a zinc finger.
Mm-hmm.
So, if that's a gene regulatory protein, so if we, would we want to upregulate that? Let's think about that. Yes, we would want to make sure that, yeah, we would want to make sure that works. If we want to make sure that our ACE2 is working better, we want to make sure that we have adequate zinc function and storage in the body. Now, magnesium, this is not something that people think about, but magnesium runs in 300 different enzymes in the body, okay? If you are having impaired metabolic function, think back to what we were talking about in terms of the AMPK, insulin function, all of those kinds of things. If we have imbalance anywhere in the body, do you think that that's going to be problematic? Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. Yes. Good. Mm-hmm. All right. So magnesium, super, super important. Okay. Especially in this circumstance. All right. I happen to like magnesium 3 and 8, but other forms of magnesium can be helpful depending on your condition. Now, moderate evidence. All right. I am a huge fan of V-Clear and Umka. Between 1 to 3 times a day, 1 time a day if you're asymptomatic, 3 times a day if you start to get a little cold or runny nose or any of that kind of stuff. Melatonin, this is really interesting, okay? So what we found is that people under 40 have higher levels of melatonin. After 40, our levels start to decrease significantly. So, it's been postulated that this is why we have a higher death rate in SARS-2. Okay, so melatonin also acts on multiple different anti-inflammatory pathways. We use it in cancer. So this is something that, can't really hurt in a lot of ways. There are a couple of reasons why you shouldn't take melatonin, but for most people, melatonin is going to be pretty helpful. Melatonin has not been totally deemed safe in pregnancy, so word of caution there. Moderate exercise and sleep, y'all. Make sure you go to bed, aka the melatonin. Don't be doing an Ironman right now, not that you can, but don't be heavy exercising, okay? So the extreme exercise actually compromises your immune system, okay? Go for a walk, go for a hike. Don't be blowing it out, okay? So keep it relatively moderate there. And theanine, if you're stressing, if you're panicking, remember, do not let that stress axis, don't let the stress axis get out of line, okay? We don't want to be up here, we want to be down here, because that's going to impact the way that the virus can actually infiltrate your lungs. Any comments?
I love L-theanine.
Makes sense.
My best friend.
My face.
You guys always have your bottles next to you too.
Oh,
you have your bottles next to you.
I believe it's green tea that's high in theanine, right?
That's right. That's right. Very good. All right. So anybody want to touch really quickly on the Tylenol and ibuprofen controversy, and then I think we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching a video today about ibuprofen or just NSAIDs in general, and I think one of the things that they were looking at is it actually does have sort of an antiviral effect, but that it also increases, or it blocks COX-2, is that right? And so it increases arachidonic acid and decreases the prostaglandins. So there's that piece. And then there's also with ibuprofen, or just NSAIDs in general, the damage that it can do to the kidneys, which then of course is going to increase ammonia and cause all the other issues that people are already having with kidney function when they have the virus.
Yeah, so I mean, I think one of the things that's really interesting is that, Tylenol, of course, depletes glutathione. So, we always want to make sure that we have adequate levels of glutathione. People, talk about selenium. Selenium is something that, buzzed around for quite a bit. Most people are not deficient in in selenium, guys. So, if you over supplement with selenium, there are problems there. So don't rush out and take selenium thinking that that's going to be preventative. And then also, again, if you overstimulate the glutathione pathway, you may actually start pulling through an enzyme called CBS. And this kind of ties into the ammonia pathway. And so this is pure conjecture here in terms of biochemistry, but let's just say you have CBS downregulation. So this particular gene basically would cause you to have increased risk for hypertension, cardiovascular disease, etc. And so let's say you get COVID-19. So you have the cytokine storm, your body is in complete, shutdown mode. You're heading towards end of life. You're going to have a buildup of something called S-adenosyl homocysteine, or SA, in this case. So, you're basically activating a bunch of genes that shouldn't be activated. Your body is basically flipping out. To flux through this, your body may end up dumping through homocysteine, or flipping up or upregulating cystathionine beta synthase. When that happens, you end up having increased levels of ammonia. You also start to try and produce glutathione. You'll upregulate sulfation. You'll have increased levels of sulfate, taurine, those types of things. The consequence of that, again, is really high levels of ammonia. You have immune activation, those types of things, because your body's trying to rebalance. If you were to have kidney impairment or take ibuprofen, which would be more damaging to the kidney, then that could be an exacerbation of this process. So I think that is a potential mechanism of why the body, or why the scientists and doctors are basically saying that ibuprofen could be problematic. If we add in the cyclooxygenase pathway into that, and looking at fatty acid metabolism, and having things like arachidonic acid and the prostaglandins and the leukotrienes and all of those are inflammatory cytokines as well, then we are essentially we're trying to block that pathway by doing so. But there may be an influx of those fatty acids. We may have too much lipid peroxidation in that process. So the body, you guys, always tries to balance. It always tries to find a way to stay in homeostasis. And when you have that massive shift between Th1 and Th2, and the T regulatory cells are fighting, basically, you've started a war in there, your body, those biochemical pathways that are normally spinning along just fine, may do this, okay? They may spin the other direction. And, I think that is actually what's happening in a lot of these cases. And so we can't really expect that the biochemistry is going to behave in the way that we would think that it would, based on a normal circumstance. Okay. So, what you can expect from us. We're working again on a custom panel that includes the personalized medicine approach. We are going to be looking again at the cytokine storm pattern analysis, an ACE pattern analysis, and of course, detailed nutrient pattern analysis. So everything from how you process vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin A, potassium, all of those types of things. Several of the things that we've talked about in here, everything from melatonin, everything looking at ApoE4, all of those things, all of the risk factors that we've touched on, and many other things. So we are working very quickly trying to get this ready. I don't know if it will be as polished as some of our other panels by March 30th, but for our patients, this will be available in-house. So, I don't know if we will have I don't know if it will be available at Omics, but it will be available at NGI within the next couple of weeks. So we thank you guys for joining us today. Of course, if you have any questions, please contact us at nutritionalgenomics.institute.com. Stay well, and we will see you guys next week. All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.